Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Dan Nessel Show. I'm your host, Dan Nessel. You know, I always thought I was a good networker. I knew how to meet people at events. I knew how to build up my contact list. Well, it turns out I might as well have been flying blind because, look, my guest today has turned networking into a discipline, into a science. And just reading his stuff has taught me that I've been doing it wrong. He's the founder of CXO.org, the CFO 100, a private network of chief financial officers. He's the founder of the HR 100, a private network of HR officers. He's the founder of the Influence Board. He is the most networked guy in Colorado and probably beyond. Please welcome to the show, my friend, Jay Allen. Thank you so much for coming on, Jay. It's a pleasure to see you.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate you inviting me. It's exciting to be here. Thank you.
Well, I definitely appreciate it. And, since you touch on like topics that are kind of near and dear to my heart with networking and such, I mean, I've been networking since 2000 and probably since you leave college and since you're trying to find a job in the first place, you just don't realize that you're doing it. But I'm building my own career and building businesses and so on through the course of the last 20 some odd years, especially since I lived in Japan and, started out, my own entrepreneurial venture back in the turn of the century, 2001 or 2002. That's when networking took on a big significance for me. And that's when LinkedIn popped up on my radar and everybody's radar, I think, shortly thereafter. And I built up my career, and I think I owe a lot of where I am now to LinkedIn. But that's only part of the story. And what I'd love to hear from you is, how you got to where you are, and how networking played a role in that, and how you discovered basically what became the law of two favors and the Influence Board. So, what's Jay's story?
Well, I usually don't tell the first part of the story, but I will this time. I had a lot of jobs growing up, and was always a decent networker. I would keep in touch with kind of the alumni from my previous previous companies I worked with, and every now and then I'd invite a group of them to lunch, and we'd get together. And so I would consider myself a pretty decent networker at the time, but I went from marketing roles into sales roles, and I was I was a poor salesperson, mediocre at best. I hated cold calling. I was really horrible. I'm a really relationship oriented person. So the thought of I'm going to make 100 phone calls today and get 98 to tell me to pound sand, and two that will reluctantly take a meeting. That's not exciting to wake up every morning and think you got to do that. And so I reached a point where I kind of had a midlife crisis, and I was asking myself, what do I want to be when I grow up? Because I like sales, but everything I have to do to be successful at sales, I dislike. And so something has to change. I actually, on a piece of paper, wrote down, okay, what are my skills? And I made a list of my skills. And then I had another column, what am I passionate about? And I wrote a list of things I'm passionate about. And some of my skills I was passionate about, and some of my skills I wasn't passionate about, and some of my passions I wasn't skilled with, with. So, and then I had a column of what do I want my life to look like?
Mm-hmm.
And at the time I was traveling a lot, and I had a young family. I was like, man, I want to travel less. I was working for a company where I had to sell a lot of widgets each month. And then at the end of the month, I got pushed to the bottom of the hill and had to start over. And I was like, man, I'd love to do a few big deals each year instead of this process. And I hated cold calling. So it's like, I don't want to cold call anymore. And so I just started to list these things, hoping I could make a connection between my skills, my passions, and what I wanted to do. And I had one last column in this spreadsheet, and it was, what are my gaps? And my thought was, what is it I still need to learn? Is there a skill I still need to develop? What is it that I still lack that could connect these pieces together so that I could leverage my skills, pursue a passion, and achieve the lifestyle that I wanted? And it was, that column was blank for a long time. And I finally put something in that column, kind of tongue in cheek. I wrote down, I need to be best friends with the most powerful and influential people in Colorado. And I did it tongue in cheek because, it's like, yeah, right. Yeah, so does everybody else wants that.
Yeah.
But I wrote it down because it essentially solved all my problems. I could do I'm running with the big dogs, and I could do bigger deals. I wouldn't have to travel because it's all these powerful people in Colorado, and I could do Colorado deals. I wouldn't have to cold call because it'd all be my friends. In my mind, if I really achieved that, it would be the glue that sticks all these things together. It was probably 3 months after I wrote that I was pondering this, and I remember the moment, that lightning struck. I was in a minivan with my kids in the car driving down I-80 in Rawlins, Wyoming, thinking about this. And I realized I'm good at networking and I'm passionate about networking. And what if I just helped these powerful and influential people meet each other? I'd be doing something I know how to do and I like doing. And maybe it would help me build those relationships. And so when I got back from that vacation, I made a list of 10 executives I had never been able to get a meeting with in 2 years of cold calling. And I invited all 10 of them to lunch to meet each other. And I told them, hey, no sponsors, there's no speakers. We're just going to grab lunch and get to know each other. And by the way, you're paying for your own lunch.
Mhm.
All 10 of them showed up to this lunch. And that was really my aha moment where I said, wow, I've been doing this wrong.
Yeah.
I went from never meeting these people to having lunch with all 10 of them at the same time. And that's what really started me on the path to ultimately creating my first organization, CXO, in 2000. And within 2 years, I was on the cover of Colorado Company magazine as the most connected executive in Colorado.
First of all, it's an incredible story. And the result that you got was exactly what you wrote in your Excel sheet, right? That's, you need to
Yeah.
be best friends with the most important people in Colorado. I mean, write it down, make it happen. I suppose you live true to that word. I mean, in your book, in the Law of Two Favors, by the way, everybody, you need to get a hand on the Law of Two Favors. It is a very smooth and very practical read, and you can devour it in just a couple hours. You write in the book that you need to become you become the type of influential person that you are hoping to find in those you seek to meet. It's kind of another way of describing the golden rule, but you that seems to be what you sort of went out to be. And you hear stories all the time of entrepreneurs or of successful business people or artists or whatever who do almost what you did, which is just create a blank slate and just listen to what the universe is telling you in some way and just write down the first thing that comes to mind. Because, letting it sit for a while, you're going to come up with some answers that are there for a reason.
It was a lesson in, like you said, letting the universe tell you what you should be doing. It's not sitting back and waiting for that to happen. I mean, it took, I had to lay all this out on paper and really ponder it and think about it. And it didn't happen overnight, but
Mhm.
but it did come to me.
Well, and that's the thing. It's clearly not a magical process because you went through all these steps, an analysis of your present state of being in a very almost like a very in a very consultant type of a manner. Right? I'm going to lay out the as is, and I want to find out what the to be is, and that's where I do a gap analysis, and you apply that to yourself. And there's dozens of self help books or personal performance improvement books that will tell you the same thing, to go and take an inventory and do some aspirational image training or modeling of where you want to be and what you need to be, and then what's the gap there. And you clearly did that, but came up with such an interesting kind of aha, which is just like, I need to be best friends with these people. And the thing is, you called them 10 people. You're a guy who hates cold calling, and yet you essentially did almost that. You cold called 10 people whom you wanted to meet. And then you get them into because you had something of value to give them, which was each other's company. And then you get them into this room or into this lunch, and you're sitting with them. Now, here's the part that I don't quite get, or that I'd love to hear more about, is how did you justify your own presence there? What would you say that you were there for? Who were you in that situation?
So that's a great question, and I actually address this in the book. It's like,
Yeah.
what do you say when that moment arrives? And I told them, Hey, I just left, a little bit of wordsmithing. Hey, I'm a marketing guy, but
Mhm.
I said, hey, I just exited a company recently, and meaning I had just gotten fired, but I didn't say that.
Of course.
And I have some time on my hands, and so I thought I would be the administrative support for you guys to start to grow your network of other influential people in town. And
And that
I
worked.
yeah, one of the executives in that first lunch said something that I'll never forget. He said, "Well, this lunch solves 2 problems for me, Jay. Problem number 1 is if I made a list of the 50 people I really needed to know in town and then went to the events I typically get invited to, I would never meet those 50 people. The second problem is I don't know who should be on the list of the 50 people I really need to know in town." So, by me coming up with scouring the landscape for interesting, influential people and just creating informal venues for you to just show up and spend an hour and a half 100% focused on getting to know those people and building relationships and finding ways to help each other. It was a unique enough concept. Nobody else was providing it. And
Yeah.
so I went from a 2% cold calling success rate to probably 97% cold calling success rate, where I'd make a list of 100 C-level executives of billion-dollar companies, and I'd get 97 of them to say, "Yeah, I'm in. Let me know when the next lunch is."
A couple things occur to me as I'm talking about that, as you're talking about that. The first is what kind of an industry or world do we live in where 2% success rate is good? I hated cold calling as well. I was a recruiter for some time. I've been in real estate a little bit here and there. I've played the sales role a couple times in my life, and every time it's that bit of it that just doesn't sit with me. And I have utmost respect for people who can pick up the phone and work it and really, close deals with some spit and elbow grease. And that's great, but it's not so efficient, right? It's not too efficient. That's probably why I like marketing so much more in communications is because, you're going out to a mass audience and you can just kind of, you know, grab them, get their attention for whatever it is that you want to get their attention for, and see that working in a larger scale. But there's not that kind of at the end of it all. It's not. I'm not on the hook to get this one person to buy something from me so that I can eat this week. It's like
Right?
it's a little bit of a different deal. But that whole idea that cold calling is something that works just doesn't feel right to me.
Yeah, and I agree. And I had bosses that told me over the years in my sales roles, "Hey, Jay, it's a numbers game. You just got to make those 100 phone calls." I rejected that
Yeah.
ultimately and decided, you know what? And I enjoy cold calling now because 97% of the time they end up excited to talk to me and engage. So what's not to like about that?
I mean, it's not a cold call anymore, right? It's cold in that it's somebody that you don't know, but as you say in your book, it's not like you're really selling. You're actually out there to build a relationship, and I think it's important to draw a distinction between those things.
Yeah, it's relationship first. It's good. It goes back to the title of the book, "The Law of Two Favors," which you provide two meaningful favors before you even bring up the topic of what you need.
And when you say, offer two favors, I mean, well, you can tell us how you came up with that number or that law in a minute, but I didn't get the sense reading, by the way, that you were saying keep track of those two favors.
No,
Right? It's more of an actual, like, a real authentic friendship, a position of friendship and a position of service. That is what will it's the only thing that works and yields results.
yeah, it's any real friendship is a give and a take, and so all I'm saying is give first. And I think I say it in the book, but one thing I'm opposed to is someone saying, "So, what can I do for you?" You
Yeah,
know,
you
and
said that straight out as one of my notes, and I admit to that error so many times. Somebody calls me or gets me on LinkedIn, I'm like, "Okay, so what can I do for you?"
And how many times when you've said that have they said, "Let me tell you exactly what you can do for me."
Never.
That's
Not
right.
one time.
Yeah, it becomes a meaningless gesture, and that's why I'm opposed to it. And I talk a little bit in the book about what to do instead. But
Well, it's what you just hit it right there. It's about meaning,
yeah,
and if you can take anything away from not only the book, but just your the experiences that you've shared, and that you've shared with me, but I hope that we share sometime, like during this conversation a little bit, is that they're all backed by meaning. I mean, there's no shortcut to long-term success. But when you're dealing with the kinds of people, and just to go back to my question earlier, because I said there were two things, right? I said that there was the idea of the success rate of cold calling being actually a good thing. The other thing I wanted to point out from how you put that lunch together, calling, 100 millionaires, and ultimately you even reach out to some billionaires here and there. And like, there's a lot of words for somebody who can do that, who can pick up the phone. But the one that comes to mind and that I'll use on this show is confidence. I mean, how did you get to the point where you had the confidence to just say, you know what, I'm going to pick up the phone. Just going to call this guy, because that's such a wall that people have trouble getting over.
Yeah, it came down to me reaching a point where I realized these people were all just like me. They have health challenges, they struggle in their marriages, they get laid off and struggle, emotionally to get that next job. As I became friends with all of them, I realized, man, they're no different than me. And the shine of, wow, this is an important person, and I should be nervous to talk to him. That shine came off the apple really fast. and
Yeah.
and I was able to just have genuine conversations at that point, and it made all the difference.
I have to admit, Jay, that when I first was introduced to you by our friend Mike O'Neill, and my listeners might remember Mike from an earlier episode. I called him the LinkedIn legend because that is what he is, but he's so much more than that. He's such a friendly guy who basically I think he lives the law of two favors in some ways. I don't know if it's two or seven or 10, but I mean, he has gone above and beyond for me. And I'm not sitting here keeping score, because we also know from the book that it's not a system of cashing in chits, or, you don't want that tit for tat situation. And I totally agree with that. But Mike just does it out of the kindness of his heart, but also because he feels an affinity with me. And it's wonderful. But Mike introduced us, and the first time I called you, I was like, "Quick, I'm about to talk to the CEO of an organization that basically deals with CEOs or CIOs or whatever, CXOs, right?" And this is a fellow who is used to talking to billionaires, and here I am, a lonely little podcaster from New Jersey. I mean, I know that I'm underselling myself, and I certainly have been accused of being a little too deferential at times, because I do have my own career and my own cred, but still, I have this built-in kind of, oh my gosh, is this guy going to take me seriously? So when I got on the horn with you, or the Zoom, as it were, you put me at ease in like 10 seconds, but I was a little nervous because here I am talking to somebody and I'm like, well, gosh, what if I don't have anything interesting to say? Or what if that there's not a meeting of the minds immediately? Am I going to be, kind of, okay, your time's up, hit the road, Jack, is this what's going to happen? But of course, that doesn't happen. And life has taught me that almost never happens. It's almost always, people are approachable and people want to talk, especially if you're not selling something, right? And that's the key. But another thing you wrote in your book really kind of speaks to that a little bit. This one phrase you say, "Courage is a self-inflicted quality that strengthens every time you use it." If that's an original quote, amazing, because I've written that down. But it makes sense. It's something that it's like it just builds. You build this kind of sense of courage, and thank you for that. But it just seems as that's a big stumbling block, people to get over that wall.
We used to bring in interns and train them on what we do and how we do it. And we'd start off by breaking them into groups, and we'd say, okay, you have an assignment. You're going to call the CFO of a $1 billion company and invite them to be to be included in the CFO group that we're creating. So come up with your script of what you would say and how you would
Yeah.
say it. And then we'll have all of you present, and I'll give you feedback. And so 100% of the time, what they all come up with is, "Dear Mr. Jones, I represent an organization that puts on CFO events. We would really like to have you participate." And, it's one of these formal, sorts of things. And when they're all done presenting, I tell them, here's what I say. Hey, Joe, the other CFOs of the billion-dollar companies in town are grabbing lunch on Tuesday. They'd really love to include you. Any chance you can break away? I'd really love to introduce you. And it's the informality of it that is appealing. The more formal you are, and the more you're a quote unquote organization that's reaching out to them, I mean, those are red flags.
It's a perfect example of conventional wisdom, right? That just,
Yeah.
doesn't work. I mean, I know that especially in this day and age where you're getting solicited all the time and like in my day job, I have an executive role and I get nonstop solicitations from LinkedIn especially, and we know how that goes and I think I'll get into that a little bit with you as well. But the rare ones that break through are the ones that I know aren't out to get something from me. And that means if it's written formally, I know immediately that they're out to get something from me. But there, look, it depends. Like if I know it's coming from a student, you gotta give them a break, right? But and as you've written about in the book, people do look for mentors, and gosh, I would love to be asked to be a mentor someday. Hint, hint, listeners, be a good thing. But no, I mean I've been asked to help out with things. But anyway, like this whole idea of communicating and of shaking the tree and just changing the way things are done has been part and parcel of your MO, really. What are some of the other things like that you've kind of turned upside down a little bit in that respect?
The influence board was one of those kind of other inventions like
Hmm.
CXO, where I had been asking myself for many years, okay, I figured this out and it works for me. How do I scale this? How do I teach it? How do I, at one point I tried to bring people in to run different groups I was creating around the US, and almost universally they would fail within a couple of years.
Yeah.
and, and I was trying to figure out, what is the special sauce to solving the problem of a salesperson getting a meeting with a high level executive. I've found one way to solve it, which are building these relationships through organizations that I create. But what are some other ways that we could solve that same problem? And it was actually during one of my CXO events with a number of high level executives that they brought up, man, they're getting 30, 50 calls, emails a day from vendors wanting their time. And, it is literally impossible for them to listen to all those requests and to filter them for relevancy, quite frankly. So they end up basically ignoring the noise, deleting them, and that's the only solution they have. But they wanted another solution. They were open to
Hmm.
other ideas. And one of the executives themselves said, "Man, wouldn't it be great if we could turn this business distraction into an asset? And what if every time we got one of those emails, random emails, instead of deleting it, we forwarded it into a platform of some kind? And over time, it would build this community of people who want our time. And then once a month, we could auction an hour of our time to that community,
Hmm.
and the winning bidder could get a meeting with us, and the funds raised could go to a charity we designate. And maybe we get exposure to some new ideas and new companies as a result as well." And that was the seed of the
Hmm.
idea for the influence board. And the executives were very much behind it. I mean, they loved the idea.
In a nutshell, what is the influence boards model now? And I know because I'm part of it, but I'd like you to describe. Yeah.
We toyed with this idea for a decade. So it evolved a lot. We tried a few things. The auction, it turns out, was a horrible idea because the winning bidder was the biggest vendor.
Oh yeah.
And there was no filtering for relevancy. Great, I won the bid, but you have nothing I need to buy. But hey, meet with me, I guess. And so there were some really big problems with that process. We looked at several other models and we landed on a model that worked for everybody. And the way it works is the executives set a value for an hour of their time. So they may say $300 for an hour of my time, and it's $300 for everybody.
Hmm.
And now I'm only going to pick meetings that are interesting. So it's not, based on dollar value. First level of filtering is the executive is going to tell you in their profile that's visible, hey, I'm interested in talking about these topics, and I'm
Hmm.
not interested in talking about these other topics. So right out of the gate, a salesperson can look at that and say, I'm in the box or I'm not in the box. And if I'm in the box of interest, then I can submit a meeting request, and the executive will limit how many are allowed to be submitted each month. They might say five. And once five come in for the month, no more can come in. They look at all five and they say, wow, these two are really intriguing. I'm going to take those two meetings and I'm going to say no to the other three.
Those two who get through have agreed to pay $300 to, but not to the executive.
Right.
That's the brilliant part. This is where I love this model, because if they have skin in the game, but it's not for the exec. It's not a pay for play type of a thing. Where does the money go?
It has to go to a charity that the
Yeah.
executive pre-designates. So, some are raising money for cancer, Alzheimer's. It can be really. I have one that's raising money for like their kids'
Mhm.
soccer program at high school and stuff like that. It's just a great way for them to benefit some cause that they're passionate about while taking a vetted, pre-qualified meeting of interest.
Yeah.
And so, really, everybody wins in the process.
Well, how does the influence board then, earn either a profit or its operational funding?
Yeah, originally we were going to take a percentage of that meeting value, but
Mhm.
we partnered with the Secretary of State, who happens to be in one of my networking groups, and he said, no, no, don't do that. You become a paid solicitor, and there's
Mhm.
all these laws and reporting requirements. So we did it like an auction. So in an auction, if you win an auction for $100, they tack on a certain percent in addition to that, and so that's the model we adopted.
Okay.
So if it was $100 meeting, your invoice would be $117, and the $17 would be our revenue, and the $100, all the 100 would go to charity.
Brilliant. And it's been working pretty well, right? I mean, we were talking about this before.
Yeah.
It was originally a Colorado platform, but things have changed.
Yeah, we started out, onboarding all the members of the different executive organizations I've run over the years here locally. And so there were about 800 high level executives that joined the platform year one when we rolled it out in 2020. It's fast gaining traction in other markets. I would say by July of 21, we'll have executives from most of the major markets in the US. We'll go from that initial 900 to probably 10,000 by the end of this year.
That's incredible. And by the way, this episode we're recording in March of 2021, and it'll probably air around that time. It'll air in like June-ish time, June, July. So by the time this airs, folks, you won't have to look too far to find somebody in the influence board. And it is a great organization, and I know because I met Jay that way. But I do want to talk about that a little bit more, because it's fascinating to me the way that you see all kinds of influence marketing and influence this and influence that going on. But what you're doing is actually creating extra value in the system. It's not just a transaction between one party or another. There's a charity element. There's also a potential deal that's going to be made. There's filtering happening, and it's networking as a discipline, as a science, which is kind of where I came to when I was thinking about who is Jay Allen. And it's just that, you've turned networking into a science and into a real discipline. And I'd like to just shift it a little bit, and talk about that a little bit more. And a lot of the people who listen to this show are like me on LinkedIn all the time, or they've gone to tons of business events and pressed the flesh. And you come out there with, oh, hey, in the old days, it was how many business cards did you get, especially if you lived in Japan like I did, where almost your sum total value was gauged by the number of business cards you had in your big binder at home or in the office, as it were. Heck, if you were a salesman, you might if you're a salesman applying for a new job, you might not have a resume, but you might have a binder loaded with business cards. And they say, well, so, what do you bring to, why do you want this job? And you say, well, I have, 14,000 business cards. And they'll say, okay, you're hired. So, I mean, clearly, there's a commercial value there to, in certain cultures, to the number of connections you have. But for most of us, right, it's you go to these parties, you press the flesh, you hand out your business cards, or nowadays it's you do QR codes, or you just talk to each other and you get on each other's LinkedIn almost immediately. And 90% of that are just people that you're never ever ever going to see again or talk to again. So, how can we do this a little bit better? In your book, and just in times we've talked, you talk about networking in so many interesting ways, but you divide it into three areas: building, managing, and leveraging. right? So building your network, how to manage that network, and then how to leverage the connections. But it's not pushing them to, to kind of do unethical things. It's just using the kind of social capital to be able to get meetings and do favors and get favors and so on. So, as I was reading, I thought that maybe managing the network is the most difficult part, but I think that everybody has a different difficult part of this. How would you say, like, what would you say to somebody getting started or who's already, maybe somebody who's already got a network? Most of the people listening to this will already have a network. Like, what are the do's and don'ts? What should they be doing?
I was asked once to come in and meet with a group of business leaders and talk to them about networking. And I asked them when we started the meeting, I said, describe networking to me.
Mm.
And they said, well, it's, walking into a room of 200 strangers and forcing myself to have awkward conversations. And universally, they all hated networking because
Yeah.
that's what networking was to them. And so I said, okay, here's the first thing I want you to do. I don't want you to go to those events ever again. And that might seem like an odd thing to say, being a networking expert, but when I stopped going to those events is when my networking efficiency went off the charts, because I had been relying on what I've heard termed the law of random collisions. And people who go to these events tout that as the value. I run into people that I never imagined would have been there, and we have really interesting conversations and business results. And my answer to them is, that's not a strategy. That's like random luck. And if random luck is your strategy, man, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
you know so what I started to do is, hey, okay, what am I trying to accomplish personally or professionally, and who are the individuals that can most help me succeed in that effort? And I'd make a list of the exact individuals that I need to build a relationship with. And going to some random event, I'm not going to meet those people.
Yeah.
If I did, it would be, luck, like I said.
Exactly.
So I'd make a list and I'd invite them all to get together to meet each other. And guess what? They'd mostly all show up. And so every networking event I had was my own networking event, and everybody in the room was somebody I needed to know. And so from an efficiency standpoint, way more efficient than
Yeah.
going to an event.
And hyper focused.
Yes.
Hyper focused. So you say that at the end of the book as well. It's all about focus, right? So keep your focus. But so let's say you have a network, at least on paper you do, or on digitally you do. Let's say it's me. I have a couple, maybe 5 or 6 thousand people in my network, in my first kind of degree network. By LinkedIn standards, it's maybe a large network, but it's not a huge one. There are so many people out there with 10, 15, 20,000 people, and there's a certain numbers game that's being played there. Like, oh, you have how many thousands? But those 5,000 people in my network, I really genuinely wish the best for every single one of them. I connected with them all for a reason. And, there's probably a few hundred in there that I just clicked yes for no, because I was in the mood at the time. And I've gone through these ups and downs in my life where, especially in the early days where you accept anybody, and then maybe you're about to shift careers and you're like, okay, I need to widen my nets because, you know, I don't know what this guy or this girl is going to get me. So I better err on the side of accepting the connection,
Right.
right? Because I'm going to expand. And it's almost like embracing that randomness. And then there are times and I believe that this is the way that we probably always should be, where you only connect with people who have an affinity of some kind, who you really want to know about, who you're genuinely curious about, and who for one reason or another, or that there's and when I say affinity, like they're in the same industry, or there's a genuine benefit to connecting, even if it's just a personal one. In other words, being very strategic and very focused about it. So if you got this mixed up network like I have now, which is what I was going to say, is there a way to kind of rebuild or repair it in some ways?
Yeah, and let me put a framework to kind of the question. So we just talked about building your network, and that's a whole process into itself. What am I trying to accomplish? Who do I need to meet? How do I reach out to them and build a relationship? That's a process into itself. Now you're talking about the manage process, which is, okay, if I never met another new person, I already know a ton of people. previous jobs I've had, clients that I've had, people I go to church with, people I went to school with, people I'm connected to on LinkedIn. So if I never met another new person, what am I doing to manage that existing network, keep in touch with them, keep them abreast of what I'm doing, keep abreast of what they're doing, foster connections among them that are high value, and just playing that role of helping them meet and connect. I'm a big believer you got to build that is a process unto itself. And I've done several things over the years. One is every month I do what I call an open networking lunch. In the days of COVID, things have changed, but in the
Yeah.
past, it was always at the same restaurant in a private room, and everyone would just pay for their own meal. And everyone who reached out to me during the month and said, "Hey, we should grab coffee. We should grab lunch." I'd say yes to all of them, even if it was some stranger calling me to sell me stuff on the phone. I'd say, "Yeah, let's get together," and I'd give them all the same date, time, and place. And I've had 40 people show up at the restaurant.
Are they all under the impression that it's a one-on-one with Jay?
What I do tell them is that did happen a few times, and so I changed my tactic to say I would tell them, "Yeah, let's get together this time, date, and place. I'm getting together with some other business leaders, and you and I can get to know each other, and I can introduce you to these other folks as well, and it'll be a great time." And so they come kind of knowing that.
Yeah.
Interesting things happened. First of all, and I would also invite some of the people in my existing contacts.
Mhm.
So I'd printed off all my contacts, and I would actually have my admin help me. Every month I'd highlight 20 people that I haven't talked to in a while, and she would call and invite them to this lunch as well. And we'd spend the whole lunch just getting to know each other and finding ways to help each other. And the people who had reached out to me because they needed something from me, usually a connection that I had,
Yep.
if I had lunch with them all on my own, one on one, I would have to solve all their problems. When I get them in a group and they tell the group, "Hey, I'm trying to make this connection with this company," 9 times out of 10, sometimes 10 times out of 10, somebody else in the group could help them. And I would walk away scot free from the lunch, not having any to dos,
Yeah.
and yet would get all the credit for helping them achieve what they needed to achieve.
It's like a halo effect generator, like we're always looking in our reputations for the halo effect to get the positive juju from other people and, earn it. I mean, and you shouldn't just like, just walk, you can't just walk into a halo effect, but it's the opposite, it's the opposite of guilt by association, right? You just you associate with good people, good things happen, and if you're the one, especially if you're the one that made that connection possible, you benefit from that. Your equity rises. So that makes sense as a really excellent way to kind of to manage and maintain your network of existing contacts and even maybe grow new ones.
I also did something called LinkedIn lunches, and they
Mhm.
were amazing where I would pick, 40, 50 people on LinkedIn that I had never met before, but I'd really like to meet. And I would send all of them a note on LinkedIn saying, "Hey, we're doing a Denver LinkedIn lunch. I'm connected to a ton of influential people in Colorado that I've never met. And I'd like to get a group of them together to just break bread, get to know each other. And I'd like to invite you. And you're going to have a chance to meet a number of other influential people that are part of my network." And I'd send that out at the time, LinkedIn allowed you to send a message to 50 people in your network.
Mhm.
And I'd send it out to 50 and I'd have 25 show up. I mean, it worked really well.
That's a good hit rate. That reminds me of one of my good friends and also an influencer in his own right, a fellow named Neil Schaefer, who actually wrote recently a book called The Age of Influence. And he's an expert on influence marketing, but he was an early adopter of so many social platforms. And we became friends because we got connected on LinkedIn maybe 12 or 13 years ago. And we got connected because we have certain affinities. We're both had deep Japan experience is the main thing. And I was, oh, here's a guy from Japan who's working it on LinkedIn. Sure, I'll connect with him. And, we managed to hit it off. Then, couple years later, he did exactly what you said, which is he decided to have a LinkedIn. Well, it was a dinner, but he's like, I'm traveling to New York, and I'm just reaching out to some of the people on LinkedIn who I've been in contact with, but who I don't really know, and I'm going to be at this place at this time. Come around. So I grabbed a friend and we went over to meet Neil Schaefer, who by that point was a published author and somebody I was already in admiration of, and we hung out for a while, and that sparked a friendship that lasts to this day. Neil was on my podcast a couple of months back, and he is a keynote speaker at a lot of these. So it's in things related to social media, especially. It's not like we've ever done business with each other or anything. Just genuine connection based on affinities and friendship and consistency. I think. But that LinkedIn event is what did it. Like that. That was a brilliant idea, and makes me think that in the post-COVID time, we're going to see a little more of that. People are tired of this online stuff.
Well, in the how things are changing with COVID is an interesting dynamic to all of this.
What's your experience so far? And by the way, hopefully by the time this is published, most people will have either been vaccinated, or those who choose to be vaccinated will have probably been vaccinated. Will Many states will certainly be open, but hopefully we'll all be on our way back to something that resembles pre-COVID life. But at the time of this, we're still under restrictions. They're lightening a little bit, but we're still under restrictions mostly. So, what is your perspective on how things have changed a lot, Jay?
Yeah, I wasn't sure how the virtual, converting. I mean, I was doing 50, 70 executive events a year,
Hmm.
different groups of heads of IT, heads of marketing, heads of HR, heads of finance, CEOs. Um, and every group kind of took to virtual differently. I just had a CXO event today, and we've gone from virtual to hybrid events. So we have one of the CXO members host, which is what we did pre-COVID. So it was the senior leadership team at a PE firm here in town that hosted in their conference room. We had limited in-person attendance to 10
Hmm.
and virtual attendance to 10. So we always cap these lunches at 20 maximum,
Hmm.
and it's a different 20 every time,
Yeah.
and we spent the whole hour and a half, like we always do, just getting to know each other, and on a personal and professional level. Where do you live? Tell us about your family. What's going on at work.
How'd you work the virtual part of that?
Yeah, we just did a Zoom
Uh
meeting,
huh.
and mute yourself when you're not talking, but we don't. It's not strict round robin, so people can unmute themselves and ask a question, and we encourage that. And hey, let's have a dialogue.
Hmm.
And I mean, our CXO events. So, like, the group today was former CEO of Priceline.com, the head of
Hmm.
Ernst and Young for Colorado. Some pretty prominent people on the call, and I try my goal is to always have like a third of the people in the room, people that they've never met before. So
Hmm.
every time they're coming, so if they come and every time they show up, they already know everybody, the incremental value you're bringing drops. And so having a broad network and bringing in a really eclectic group of people, at least for the CXO group, is high value. And it's working. I get
Yeah.
feedback every time we do it. Hey, I'm on a bunch of Zoom calls, but none where we can really have open conversations and dialogue and keep it informal, and really joke and laugh and have a good time. And so it seems to be working.
And so the pandemic has in some ways been the catalyst for the Zoom elements of that, of those meetings and the virtual part. And I would imagine, and certainly in my experience, I've never met you in person in the flesh, and I've met hundreds of people now over the last year only through the auspices of Zoom or WebEx or whatever other tools we're using. And you know, it's hard to say that those relationships are any less developed or any less valuable than people whom I've met in person. Because I mean, we're sharing a lot. There's certainly a bond based on mutual like circumstances being where we are, but we can see each other. I can get the body language to a degree. Certainly, we've figured out how to get around the eye contact thing, a little bit. But there's something to be said for, it's not the same as in person, but it's not the same, and it isn't. But it's open doors, right? So in that example you just gave, were any of those Zoom people from like really far away? Were there any people from across the country, or was it still pretty local?
It was pretty local, but you bring up a good point. Some of the meetings we're having, we're getting participation from people that we never used to get participation from just because of their location and travel. And we've had people join CXO from other markets because they can participate now. They don't have to be local for the lunch. And so it's opened doors to new relationships that I wouldn't have had otherwise, probably.
And that's it's a pretty big, I think, advantage when it's coming to like the whole idea of managing your network, which is where we were at. We've built a network, we're managing a network. Now, with the advent of Zoom or where we're at now, even after the pandemic is over, I think we've really literally run out of excuses for not being able to meet with somebody face to face. I mean, it's both the benefit and the curse of digital virtual conferencing or video conferencing because why don't we just get on a Zoom? It's just as popular now as why don't we just get on the phone? Or actually, it's probably more. There was nothing ever stopping us from calling somebody before, and yet we didn't do it. But now that there's this video thing, it seems like people are even less apt to refuse the connection. Especially if you're already connected. Hey, let's get on a Zoom. And they're like, okay, fine. Thing is you just have to schedule it. And everything becomes scheduled now more than I think before the pandemic. But I think that's giving new opportunities to both network and manage your network, I suppose.
I anticipate we will always, even when things get back to normal, we'll always be doing hybrid events because so that people who want to get together in person can, and those that want to or need to join virtually can as well. I think there's going to be an ongoing benefit to that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's gonna be interesting to see how it plays out. But hey, before I forget, I wanted to get to the third part of your of build, manage, and leverage. That's the leverage part of networking, and this is where the two favors come in. And I had to, I was asking Jay before, or I was kind of explaining to Jay before that I was waiting for the two favors in the whole book, and finally there it is in the leverage section. It pops in that basically it's all about building relationships. So how does one leverage properly?
This was a hard one. This was hard won knowledge. Okay. I mean, I grew CXO to be one of the largest networks of influential people in Colorado pretty quickly. I was on the cover of Colorado Magazine. And what nobody knew was I was going broke because I hadn't figured out how to. Okay, I knew all these powerful and influential people. So what? I was the type of person that felt real uncomfortable saying, "Hey, I did you a favor. Now do me a favor." And that whole concept was just one I didn't have an appetite for. And so I had to figure out, how do I do this? And I learned a valuable lesson from a friend of mine who called me up and said, "Hey, Jay, we're moving. I could really use you and your son's help taking this furniture and piano out of my house and helping me load it." And so we went over and did that. And as I contemplated on that experience, I realized something. He asked something from me, and I did it for him, and it strengthened the relationship. It didn't detract from the relationship. So the whole concept of tit for tat, where I'm taking a chit off the table, Jay, I'm asking you to come help me, and somehow that diminishes the relationship, and now you owe me a favor, didn't exist in that relationship. As a friend, we would help each other, and the relationship would grow, not diminish. And so I started to realize that's how I should be thinking about these things relative to leveraging relationships into value. If I've truly built friendship, then me going to them and saying, "Hey, I could use your help too. What do you think about X?" shouldn't detract from the relationship at all. It should strengthen it. And so, a friend selling to a friend is a completely different thing. And you treat it different and you say things different. And it just, if you think of it in those terms, it's, "Hey, Dan, I've always wanted to see if what I sell would be a fit for your company, but I value your judgment as someone who's in that company and as a friend. Give me some advice. What do you think about the fit?" And I'm okay if the answer is no. I mean, a relationship doesn't change based on a no. But if you could give some guidance, I'd love that guidance. And things magically happen when you treat the sales process that way.
It's not just sales, is it? I mean, it's everything across. It's anytime you have a I'm not going to say a need because it's not about using the other person, but let's say you're looking for a job, right? And it's the same thing. you can have friends who work across in companies that you're interested in. And if your friendship is there, there's no harm in saying, hey, Jim, listen, man, I'm thinking of making a move. And, was wondering what's going on over in your neck of the woods. Is there anything that you think would be good for me to throw my hat in for? There's no shame in saying that. And Jim's my friend to this day. And, there is a Jim, but you know what I'm saying? Like that would not interfere with the friendship. But somehow when you got something to sell, people change sometimes, right? Like, oh, I suddenly have to become a different person or I couldn't dream of making my relationship with this person commercial in some nature. It's like something dirty about that people feel. But that's not what we're saying, right?
No, and part of it is just the way you live your life. That you live your life in a way that you treat everybody the same, regardless of whether they can help you or what level they are. And that's why I said, I get a cold call from someone trying to sell me phone service, which I don't need, and they want to meet with me. I say yes, and I invite them to one of my open networking lunches. And I've had amazing, actually, things. It turns out their dad is, a C-level executive at Whirlpool, and I was trying to get into Whirlpool. You never know. And so whether they're employed or unemployed, or you need something from them now, or you don't need something from them now, if you're treating them all the same, like a true friend, then those conversations, are pretty easy.
So as you build your network and as you manage your network and everybody in, well, I mean, everybody whom you've built with a strategic approach, the folks that you have targeted and specifically gone out for and added on through affinity and through some commonality, some reason and relevancy, those people get into your network. And if you do a proper job of managing it, but also just building relationships and being friends and having friendships, then at some untold point in the future, if an opportunity comes that happens to be a match, the discomfort around that should not even be an issue, and you can leverage those existing connections for that purpose. Is that a fair summary of?
Yeah, and I'll give you some examples. I
Sure.
mean, I had a client that had a learning technology. He's like, man, we need to get into Accenture, and so I did a little bit of research and realized, I know some people at Accenture, and I made a phone call to a guy I know at Accenture that is part of one of my groups and that I have a good relationship with. And as soon as the phone started ringing, I realized he's not in country because, it had this weird tone when the phone
Yeah.
was ringing.
Yeah.
And I was a little nervous, but he picked up. And it turns out it was the middle of the night in Japan. And, but he picked up because he saw it was me. And I told him what was going on. And he said, Jay, who you really need to talk to is the head of Accenture Learning, and she's a good friend of mine. And here's her contact information, and use my name. And so I hung up from there and called the head of Accenture Learning and mentioned my friend's name. And she took the call, and I told her what we were doing. And she happened to live in Colorado. And like 2 days later, she's in the office of the CEO of this client of mine. And so like, the CEO says, man, I'd really love to do something with Accenture. 2 days later, I have the head of Accenture Learning in his office, and she ended up investing in the company and joining the board and helping them get into Accenture. And that's kind of a friend selling to a friend, what the magic that can happen when you have those relationships.
Yeah. And again, there's no magic here, really. There's How long were you invested, or have you been invested, and probably continue to be invested in the relationship with your friend before that even happened? How long
Yeah,
were you friends?
a long time. I mean, I've
Right.
spent 20 years building 10 major networks of influential people. And it's like that story where the boat's engine is broken. So you hire this engineer, and he comes and he listens to the engine, and he takes out a hammer and he taps on one part of the engine, and the noise goes away and the engine's fixed. And he says, that'll be $10,000, please. And they're like, you tapped the hammer on the engine. He's like, yeah, but I spent 50 years figuring out what to do and how to do it. And that's in many ways, my story is, I've put in the time to build and manage these relationships. And so, yeah, I can make one phone call and amazing things happen, but not because, it's magic, because I put in the work.
Yeah, and that's a great lesson to leave with is, put in the work, it's about focus, it's about hard work. It's also about discipline and certainly relationships. That seems to be the key. There was so much more I wanted to get into with you, Jay. I mean, I haven't seen your pets on the screen today, and this is audio only for my listeners, but Jay has some amazing reptiles that he keeps, his pets at home. I highly encourage anybody to check out Jay's information, and you'll learn a little bit about that probably here and there. And next time I talk to him, we'll go through that a little bit more. But the Reptile Man and the military vehicles that you like to play around with, there's so many great things that we didn't even get to, and we've already been speaking for so long. So on that note, I think for anybody who wants to learn about Jay or who wants to talk to Jay or reach out to Jay, go to Jay Allen on LinkedIn. His name will be spelled the same way it is in the episode title. Check out influenceboard.com, not the influence board, but influenceboard.com. Go to cxo.org. Any of these places, you will find Jay at the helm and certainly willing to take a meeting if it's meaningful. Jay, is there any place else where you are that I missed? Is there anything else?
Those are good spots to go. And I would say you can download my book too, The Law of Two Favors, at influenceboard.com. Just scroll to the bottom of the homepage and there's a link to download the book. So
I will add, it's a gift from Jay to everybody because it is a great gift. It's a wonderful read. It will give you certainly some method behind the madness of building a network and maintaining a network and just basically increasing your value to yourself and to others. Jay, thank you so much for being here. This has been a real pleasure.
thanks for the invitation, Dan. Anytime. Happy to come back in the future too.
Thanks so much. If you enjoyed this episode of The Dan Nessel Show, please head on over to iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or the podcast player of your choice to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. And please don't forget to spread the word. Thanks for listening.